Now we're going to be discussing the golden mean, which actually goes by several different names: the golden section, the golden ratio, the divine proportion, and it can even be likened to the Fibonacci series. So let's talk about that. Basically, if you've probably actually seen this and not even realize it. You might have observed a really profound piece of artwork, or maybe even just seen a movie poster that's really appealing to you, and you might have wondered why it's so compositionally pleasing. The most likely reason is that the artist's intentional, or perhaps even unintentional, they employed the use of the divine proportion. And as I said, this goes by many different names. The divine proportion is a little known phenomena that basically suggests that there's a mathematical equation that's consistent with the aesthetics of good composition. It has even been proven that some people have a natural instinct for good composition that's inverted, and they inadvertently employ certain properties consistent with the golden ratio. We're going to go ahead and examine a brief history of the divine proportion and its use over the centuries, and then we'll delve in how we can use it to better make our designs more pleasing. So you may know about the golden ratio from math class, or maybe even from seeing, a recent movie, because it was kind of popular in a recent movie. But did you know that it's an important rule that you can use to create proportion in your design? And that's what we're concerned about. It's been used by man for centuries. Renaissance artists knew that the golden ratio, they knew of it as the divine proportion. Greeks used it in their architecture. You can see this all through history, the use of the divine proportion. The golden section is basically a mathematical ratio that can be applied to your design to create proportion. It is a visual representation of a number called phi. And phi is a number produced by bisecting a line at a particular point. Phi is basically 1.61803398874, etc., etc. It can also be known as the numerical sequence called the Fibonacci sequence. The golden mean also can be called the miraculous spiral because the size increases but its shape is unaltered with each successive curve of the spiral. This kind of spiral shows up in shells, in hurricanes, in the shape of a cat's claw, in a wave, galaxies, flowers. Many of them work with this specific spiral. The Fibonacci sequence can be found in many places as well, such as the ancestry patterns of bees, the branching of trees, the whorls of a sunflower, and the fruitlets of a pineapple. It has also been suggested that Leonardo da Vinci made deliberate use of the divine proportion in almost every aspect of his work, including his, well-known paintings like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. Throughout history, it has been speculated that the golden ratio is prevalent in every aspect of our universe, from the natural growth pattern of the nautilus seashell to the pyramids of Egypt, to the musical compositions of Mozart and Beethoven. It's really quite fascinating how it has been linked to be shown in so many different places. So, what does this have to do with design? Well, in short, it has a lot to do with design. The phi is evident everywhere in the universe, in nature, space, physics, mathematics, music, art, and design. Phi creates the divine proportion. And it was so called by the Renaissance artists because of its abundance in the known universe. They thought it was created by God. The divine proportion is used by artists and designers. So here's the thing. Using the divine proportion as a guide to your compositions can improve the communication of your design. Let me just reiterate and say that one more time. Using the golden section in your work can improve the composition of your design. Hopefully your ears have perked up and you're paying attention. How can it improve your design? Well, by creating a natural language your brain understands. The golden ratio naturally occurs all around us. We see it constantly in nature, in mathematics, physics, and design. If the unique ration that phi creates is all around us, it stands to reason that design created in this way is more comfortable to us, and therefore they're going to do their job quicker and more effectively. Humans instinctively find designs based on the golden section more comfortable. By using it in your design layout, you better communicate with your viewer. So let's just look at how it works. The proportions of the gold section are, as I mentioned, 1.618. And you can see that here is a bar that has a proportion of 1, and here is one with the proportion of 1.68. The golden rectangle follows a little bit of a stricter format. It's built with the same ratio as the golden section. However, the left segment, the one shown in blue, is a perfect square, and then this one is not. It is based on the 0.618 ratio. A golden rectangle can be drawn from a square, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. You first draw a diagonal corner from the corner to the midpoint and then extend it into an arc, and we'll go through this a little more in detail. I'm going to actually show you this in Illustrator momentarily. So you can see that the proportions of the golden rectangle are 1 to 1.618. You can also use simple math to apply the golden rectangle. Suppose you want to create a golden rectangle in your composition. You need to begin by deciding if you want a landscape, like wider than taller as shown, or portrait, taller than wider. I'm going to make mine landscape in this example, and I need to figure out how tall it's going to be, so I'm going to pretend that this is 8.5 inches. This is actually proportionately reduced down to be 8.5 inches. If I take 8.5 inches and I multiply it by the golden ratio, I get my width as 13.753. So if I make my format 8.5 tall by 13.75 wide, this basically, I'm using the golden proportion or the divine proportion as my media. So, this is one way that you can figure it out. Regardless of science, the golden ratio retains a mystique, partly because of its excellent approximations and partially because it turns up in so many unexpected places in nature. The spiral inside a nautilus shell is remarkably close to the golden section, and the ratio of the lengths of the thorax to the abdomen in most bees is nearly the golden ratio. Even a cross-section of the most common form of human DNA fits nicely into the golden section. The golden ratio and its relatives also appear in many unexpected contexts in mathematics, and they continue to spark interest in the mathematical community. The divine proportion is often represented by the golden spiral. This is the tool used by artists and sculptors to achieve remarkable accurate proportion and aesthetically pleasing compositions. In the golden spiral, the ratio of the length of each side of the square and to the length of the side of the next smallest square is basically the golden ratio. The rectangles formed by the combination of the squares are golden rectangles, and at every quarter turn, the spiral gets wider by a factor of phi. So let me just jump into Illustrator so I can show you how you can make your own golden ratio if you have Illustrator, and if you don't, it's fine. I just wanted to kind of illustrate it because I think it will help to explain how the golden ratio works. So I'm going to use Illustrator to do this. So here I am in Illustrator. If you want to try to do this in Illustrator, I'll just run through the steps. The first thing that you're going to want to do is open up your Illustrator preferences, and I'm going to go to Guides and Grid because I'm going to be using my Guides and Grid, and I want to go ahead and create a grid line that appears every quarter inch, and I want my subdivisions to be divided by 5. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I'll turn on my grid so that we can see it for this example. I'm going to use my rectangle tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just click and create a rectangle that is 5 inches by 5 inches. Now my Illustrator is set up to use pixels and points, so it's defaulting, but I know because when I clicked that this is 5 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to take my fill color and just make it none, so I just have a black stroke here. So you can see that here's my rectangle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag out a guide. So I have my rulers on. I'm just going to grab a guide and I'm going to drop it right in the middle of my square right here. And now I need to get my ellipse tool, and I'm going to draw actually starting from the center down here. So I'm going to hold down my mouse, then I'm going to add my Option and my Shift key so that I'm dragging out from the center, and I'm also, whoops, I went a little far down there. Let's go ahead and let's go up. I might have to draw this again. I was close, but not quite close enough. So let me just delete this. I'm going to just make my page a little bit longer because I'm going to need to pull down. I don't have the real estate to really do this. So you might not see me drawing this circle, but I'll explain it as I go. I'm going to once again click at the intersection of the grid line and the base of my square. I'm going to click my mouse and then add the Option and Shift keys so that I'm dragging out from that center point and also creating an exact perfect circle. And I'm going to keep dragging my circle until the top part of the circle is going to hit the top line of the square, and you can see that that's happening now. So I'll go ahead and release, and let me just go ahead and change the stroke color of my circle so it looks a little bit different when these things aren't selected. So you can see that right here the top of my circle is going to hit the top of the square. And then I'm going to go back and get my rectangle tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just make my stroke color black here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position my mouse at the bottom here, and I'm going to drag a rectangle out so that the top part meets with my square, and the right edge I need it to meet with the right edge of that circle. This basically is a really quick way of getting the divine proportion. This is my perfect square, and this is based on the 0.618 size of the square. At this point I don't need this anymore. I can delete the circle. It was just there as a kind of guide. So let me zoom in just a little bit so we can kind of concentrate on what we're doing here. Now what I'm going to do, I'll turn off my guidelines as well, is I'm going to begin by creating perfect squares inside of these squares, and they're going to be descending in size. So I'm just holding down my Shift key, I have snapping on, and every time I make a new square it's going to snap to the edge of the adjacent square. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be setting up the sections that I need for my golden spiral. And I might not have mentioned before, but you need to have snapping on when you do this. Alright, and that should do the trick. So what we have here is we have a series of squares that basically are going to get a little bit, sorry that was off the stage for you guys a little bit there, let me just reposition this. Okay, so I have a series of squares where I have a perfect square and they descend and get smaller. This is a little confusing to have these as different colors too. Let me just make these all filled with black real quick. Alright, so we have a series of squares that as we circle around they get smaller. So biggest, next smallest, next smallest, next smallest, next smallest, next smallest, etc., etc. And they circle around, and we could basically keep making these squares for as long as we needed to, and it would always keep the same proportion as we went around. That one's a tiny bit big right there. Let me just make this next one. There we go. And we could just keep doing this all day long. We have enough squares, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and get my arc tool, and with the arc tool I'm going to go ahead and just position it in the corner of my square, and I want to drag up and I want to drag to the corner of the next adjacent square, and I'm going to basically create arcs in all of my squares, and so they all are going to meet at the appropriate location, and this is going to give me my golden spiral. So this is one way that you can create the golden spiral in Illustrator, and you'll end up with a perfect golden spiral. And the usefulness of this is that you can have something that you could overlay on top of artwork as like a template, so that you could ensure that you were using the divine proportions in your work. Or maybe if you find something that you really like, it's visually pleasing, you could go ahead and you could see if it's using the divine proportion. It's kind of an interesting exercise, and you can basically create your spiral, and there it is. It might be nice just to give this a different color or something like that, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. But here I have a spiral that's based on the divine proportion. So that's one way that you could make this in Illustrator if you so desired. The next thing that we're going to look at is we want to look at the Fibonacci sequence, and basically it's very, very close to the golden ratio. To give you a little history of where the Fibonacci sequence comes from, in 1202, way back there, several hundred years ago, an Italian mathematician named Leonardo da Pisa published a book that told about a fascinating sequence of numbers. Because he used the pen name of Fibonacci, the pattern became known as the Fibonacci sequence, and each number is called a Fibonacci number. The next in the sequence comes from adding the two numbers before it. So your numbers are 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and it goes on from there, so on and so forth. And you just are basically always adding, like if I wanted to get the next number, I would add 21 to 13, which is going to go ahead and give me the next number in the sequence. What you get is you get this curve called an equiangular spiral, and it can be plotted using the Fibonacci squares. They're arranged clockwise in sequential order, and then the arc is drawn to connect the opposite corners until a spiral is formed. The curve can basically continue forever without ever becoming straight. The golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence, as I explained, can be found many places in nature. Many animal horns, claws, beaks, teeth, talons, tusks, and shells are curved to fit in the spiral. Some are tight curves, like the center of a shell, while others curve more gradually, but each shape fits a proportion of the equiangular spiral. Even your teeth curve enough to make a match. Long before Leonardo da Pisa lived, great artists and architects recognized the amazing beauty of this special shape called the golden rectangle. The proportions of the rectangle are more pleasing to the eye than longer, narrower rectangles or shorter, fatter ones. The length of the short and long sides are related to each other in the same way as two adjacent Fibonacci numbers, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, and so on and so forth. To find measurement of the long side, the length of the short side is multiplied by 1.62. So there's our magic number coming into play again. If you count the numbers of needles in a pine needle bundle or the number of petals on many flowers, you'll see the Fibonacci sequence. Many blooms have 5 petals: buttercups, pansies, violets, apples, pears, cucumbers, squash, and so on. Cosmoses have 8 petals, and daisies have 13, 21, 34, 55, or 89, depending on the variety. These are all Fibonacci numbers. The number of sections in seed pods are often Fibonacci numbers. Notice how many bracts on a palm tree, artichokes, pineapples, and pine cone spirals in either direction. In each case, the number of spirals in one Fibonacci number one way, and then the next number of the sequence in another way. It's really quite fascinating. If you check out how leaves on corn plants and pussy willows and many other trees are arranged in a spiral around the stem so that none of the leaves ever shade the ones directly below them from the sunlight that they need to grow. And you can also look for the equiangular spiral in shells, opening fern fronds, ocean waves, mature sunflower heads, and on animal features. You'll find the golden proportion in many works of art and architecture. If you check out the Parthenon or many works by Da Vinci, you'll find this as well. So it's quite interesting, and if you do a little more research, there's many things that are written about this. It's very interesting, and if you become a little bit more aware of it and start to incorporate it into your design, you're going to end up with designs that are going to be visually more pleasing to your viewers.